Okay, so um, the purpose of this video is to kind of clean up a couple of things that didn't make a whole lot of sense yesterday. In yesterday's video, I basically had like a contact route that took you to one place, and I also had like contact.html that took you to a different place. And so we kind of had two endpoints for the contact page. Again, you kind of had this dynamic one, kind of had more of a static one. And so what I want to do is I want to have it so when you hit the contact route or you hit an endpoint in Express, I want it to serve up a static HTML file. And so I want to show you how to do that. That's not something that I covered yesterday. And so when you go to this slash contact or even the home page, right? When you go to the root page, I want it to essentially right here have a route return a static HTML page. And then once we get that, we can demonstrate not only a GET request, which is when you're basically asking for a resource from a server, that's an HTTP GET request. But I also want to, and as this one says, demo a web form posting, which is going to be a post request. And so I'll code up a little HTML, and we'll code up a web form, and in that form, we'll post some data to the server, and we'll see kind of what we can do with that and how that all works. All right, so we'll start this up. New folder, Express Demo 3. Get to the terminal, npm i express. npm I, we already have nodemon. Let's bring in .env in case we decide to use that. npm I ESLint in case we decide to use that. Just thinking about the tools we might choose to use. Okay, npm I debug in case we decide to use the debug tools. Okay, let's make a new file, server.js. And I know we always did the MJS. I mentioned something else I wanted to show. Now, the one thing I didn't do is an npm init. So let's see what happens if I do it after the fact. I have not tried that. Let's go ahead and do an np init y and see if it... Okay, cool. It appends it, so that all works. And it even picked up my start script for that. Okay, cool. Okay, now to get in so that we don't have to type the MJS, so we could just keep it to server.js, we can go into package.json, and you're going to notice name, version, description, so on. We're going to add another one here, type of module. by adding that, we don't have to have the .mjs anymore. Um, so that should allow me to console log mom. We can go down here, node, server, we get hi mob. So you'll notice we don't have the MJS anymore by adding that type of module. Okay, so now that we have a packages installed, the next thing is kind of get Hello World up and running. What I like to do to get Hello World up and running is I'll go to expressjs.com.
Or you can start reading the chapter, chapter 2. If you haven't finished chapter 1, you're supposed to do that as well.
And bring this in now. I just have that for reference. I'm not going to copy and paste because we have the new syntax import.
Any questions? Yes, Pat?
I was trying to figure what the I to send for Gabriel and it's not letting me do it.
It's not letting you log in
No.
with your. Now, has he sent you a message saying that everything is set up for
Yeah.
you? Okay.
And then I tried to do this part where it says user is logged into our desktop and
Okay, so you're in the virtual environment and then you start load desktop up. Server 1 is unable. Okay. Okay, what I would do is maybe just tell him that he's new. Yeah, just do that, and then he'll work on yours also. Okay. No, his phone number. Maybe force him to call Bill. But that way, he's able to keep track of who he sends tickets and stuff when he's sending the message. Oh, what's that?
On my console log, these are the, this is a template string, so these are the backticks.
Cool. Oh, yes, I should have done that. Okay. I tell you, read the stuff up. What I would do is I'd copy and paste that error message to Mr. Webb because he might have to do something on his side.
All right,
He's got control of these VMs, so he
and
may have seen that
let's
error message before you.
boot that up. And it
Essentially,
says listening on port 5001. I always do a slash instead of a colon. You can see I got a problem here. If I replace it with a colon, I do get my hello world. So let's fix my typo. Great. Okay, so now we have a basic app up and running. Um, the next thing I want to do is serve up a home page, right? So kind of getting back to have a route return a static HTML page. And so what we did yesterday is we made a new folder called public. And so all your static files are going to go in public. Your home page is index.html. And what I like to do is always code in Bootstrap. And so I'm going to go to get Bootstrap docs. And here's a pretty standard HTML template with links to your Bootstrap JavaScript and your Bootstrap CSS. Kind of bring that in and paste that. Doc type wants to be capitalized. And I'll go ahead and have a div dot container and hit tab, and that makes a div with a class of container. That's a Bootstrap class. And I'll just put a h1 with my name in it. Okay, so my objective is to serve by going to the home route. I want it to serve this Bootstrap page. So we're going to go back to server.js and bring in a little bit of code. Now, again, kind of going back to the docs, you're going to see a lot of this code in the docs. Here, instead of res.send, so res is going back to the client. Request is what comes in from the client, right? Request response. So this is going back to the client. There's also a kind of look at the different methods here. We got send date, but we also have send file. and that's going to be ultimately the method that we're using. And then we have to give it essentially a path to that file. Now, um, you know, uh, it's interesting when you're talking about relative paths, right? So you could code this as a relative path on your laptop, and maybe you're on a Windows laptops, maybe you're on Linux, maybe you're on Mac. The point is the pathing on different file systems is all going to be different. So you have to code this in such a way that when you move this to a deployment server, that it doesn't really care what operating system that you're on. So you have to code this in a dynamic way that is going to work regardless if you're on a Windows or you're on a Mac, whether you're on a C drive or a D drive, all sorts of things. Um, and so there is a thing built into Express called Path that we can import, and that's going to help us with that use case of like different operating systems on different computers. So we're going to import this path object that's going to help us. Okay, and so what I'm going to do is kind of bring this in. Uh, Import star as path, so our variable here is called path, that we're going to be able to use. And now in our send file, this is a method. We're going to be able to code path.join. In other words, we're going to combine. That's what a join is. It's going to combine two strings, if you will. Underscore dir name. So that's the working directory. Again, it doesn't really care what operating system you're on. And referencing my notes, comma. So the first argument is dir name, public / index.html. And I'm also just going to go ahead and throw in a console.log home page. And those are the couple lines of code that server is currently running. Let me go ahead and stop it and rerun it. And see my error. Dir name is not defined. I thought it was built in. Let me fix that. Okay, I'm just kind of reading up on this. That was a syntax that was for the older CommonJS modules, so there's a different syntax. So you're going to notice I change import path from path. There's essentially a fix to this. Import file URL to path from URL. And now we're going to declare our const dir name equals path dir name. Okay, I'll kind of pull this up real quick. We're using these newer ES modules, and so this problem of dir name not defined is you cannot use dir name with the newer ES modules. So here's the workaround, right? And so I imported path from path, import file path to URL, create two variables. You essentially create the dir name variable using the syntax. So I added those lines of code from my Google search. Okay, and here we go. So here's our imports. Here's those two variables. Now, dir name is a variable that we create. And if I run my server, bada bing, bada boom, and I pull that up, you can see we're getting the Bootstrap page. It's got my name on it. We've got a wrapper going on. And so it's serving up my static page by hitting the route in Express. Now, the next step in this video is to post data to Express. And so in order to post data, we need a form. And so here, you might remember the form tag with a post, and we go to get Bootstrap, we can at least refresh our Bootstrap form knowledge. So if we go to the docs, and we scroll down to forms, we can make it a Bootstrap form. And so right, so there's our form. Now, if we remember, our action is the route that we're posting to. I just want to post to the home route, and I'm just going to have a pretty basic form here. I'll have a label. Class is form label, and we'll just say username, and this will be for text username.
So if you, just to reiterate, if you get the update screen on your VM,
And we'll do an input type of text. So input type of text. Class is form control. Okay, now my name, we're going to actually, this name attribute in our HTML is important because this is going to be how we access what's in the text box on the server side. So I'll just say username, and the ID of this input is text username. And my linter doesn't want the slash. There's our label. And this is our very basic form. We'll do an input type of submit. Class is button, button primary, button large. Wants you to use button type of submit. I'm good with that. And then we need a closing button tag. Closing button, and then this says submit. Notice my server is still running. I'll close it and reboot it. Open up my page. Here's my very basic form. Noticed when I click submit, it says cannot post. And I would expect that because I have not written a route for that. So the next step, once we have our basic form wired up, is, let's go back to our server. This is a get request. And so let's do an app.post. And this is posting to the home route. So this is handling a post request, and we'll say recres arrow function, and console log post hit, and res dot send thank you for posting. Okay. Let's see if that picks up. No, I did change my JavaScript, right? So NodeMon's a useful tool, and you should get in the practice of using it anyway. So let's bring in NodeMon. And so what I'll do is on my scripts, I have a start. I need a start dev. So let's do start -dev. And this is going to be the node mon command server.js. So if I close this and I say npm run, that's to run a script, start dev. Okay, we get NodeMon running. So now when we make a change to our JavaScript, it'll just reboot our server, which is nice. So let's bring in here, username Evan, and it says thank you for posting. So we hit our route, and we should also get a console log that says, the post was hit. And so that's cool. But we haven't really done anything with the username. I want to show you, yesterday we talked about like, hey, we can make this dynamic. And that's the point of running server-side logic, is to give dynamic responses. And so now that we're posting to our home route, let's make this a little bit dynamic. And the way that we can do that, keep in mind, these two objects. The request is what comes into the server from the client. So there's actually a property of that object called rec.body. And rec.body, it contains the data from the form. And I'm going to expect this to error out, but it is, I want to show you this. I want to show you this error. So it doesn't matter what we type in here. Thank you for posting, but you're going to notice back here what we put to the console, rec.body, is undefined. And yesterday, I wrote a line of code in our server.js that I said, hey, if you want to work with data coming from the client, it was called app. Let's see if I can remember. App.use. It was like something like URL encoded. If you remember that, now there was a little bit more to it. And I can explain this in a little bit more detail today. Because yesterday I just said, hey, just do it, and this is needed to accept requests from the body. I just want to show you that. And I can explain this app.use a little bit more. So here is the line of code. App.use. Anytime you see an app.use, we're installing middleware. And again, keep in mind, middleware is anything that happens, any JavaScript that you run between the request and the response. There's a bunch of JavaScript methods that run in between. That's considered middleware. So this installs middleware, again, to kind of work with the data between the request and the response. And so app.use, when I think of app.use, we are installing middleware, which is code that runs between the client request and the server response. The client request and the server response. So we're installing middleware here, and the line of code looks like this: express URL encoded, and that's a method. We write an extended property and say false. Okay, and this is the line of code that we wrote, and I said, hey, if you want to accept data from the client, and work with that data, this is the line that's necessary. And so now, if I pull up my page and I go blah, and I post it, okay, thank you for posting, but now I get a little bit something different. You can actually see the data coming across. It's no longer undefined. Now it's an object, and it has a username property, and the value is what was in the text box. And so keep in mind, this name property is what is now mapped to a JavaScript. Actually, this is a name attribute in your HTML, right? These are tags, and then these are attributes. So the name attribute in the HTML becomes a property of your JavaScript object. So .username. So what I can do with that is I can do something like const username equals rec.body.username. And now if I console log username, whatever they type, I now have that data transferred from the client into the server. I no longer need to console log the body, but now I can read the username from the client and work with it dynamically, right? So boot this up, kind of go back, and if I say ASDF, now notice what it's posting is whatever the user types. If I say Evan Gudmestead is my username and I click submit, there you go. I have the data on my server, and that's cool, right? That's what we're shooting for. Now, what's the dynamic aspect of it? Okay, well, we have a username. Maybe we want to validate that data. Kind of going back to truthy and falsy, right? So JavaScript truthy versus falsy. These are the two buckets. And so we kind of covered what is truthy and what is falsy. So falsy is an empty string. So, if the user doesn't type something, that would be considered falsy, right? And so a really easy way to validate your data to see if the user typed anything, you would just say if username. Username is truthy, else username is falsy. And so if username is truthy, we could maybe say res dot send thank you for posting plus the username. Otherwise, I'll say res dot send username required. By the way, what we're doing here is data validation, and it's very common to do both validation on the client, like I know you did in JavaScript, front-end validation, but you also want to do validation on the server. So this is a real primitive validation on the server. And let's boot this up. And if I say Evan Gudmestead, thank you for posting. If I leave this blank, we should say username required. So yeah, awesome. So kind of cleaned up a couple things from yesterday. Wanted to take a minute to do that this morning, and do a small example in doing that.